Today's guest is Fred Rutman, aka Repeatedly Dead Fred. Fred was a business professor who taught finance and marketing until one summer when his life changed dramatically, including being clinically dead 20 times. But Fred's amazing story began years before that traumatic summer, and today we're going to be hearing about how he had a stroke at birth that went undiscovered for years. And this is a story that you're not going to want to miss. Fred, welcome to Water Prairie.
Thank you, Tanya. Happy to be here.
So I've told Fred this ahead of time, but if you're new to listening to the podcast, we've been playing a game with our guest this season, and I'm asking each of my guests to provide 3 facts or pseudo facts about themselves. And you as the listener, your job is to try to guess which one is true, which 2 are true actually, and which one is the lie. And you can post your guess. If you're watching YouTube, you can post it in the comment section. If you're not, you can go to Instagram or to Twitter, find the post about this episode and write your guess in there. And a week after we release that, we'll post the answer. So you can always come back and check what your answer is. So Fred, are you ready to share your facts with us?
You betcha.
All right, what do you have?
Okay. Well, I'm Canadian, so it's the law that I played hockey. I played competitive hockey, college rugby, and I used to be able to bench press 350 pounds. Number 2, I'm Jewish and I'm a priest. And number 3, I've written a book.
All right. All right, listeners, don't go right now. Finish listening to this episode, but then make sure that you remember to go back and guess afterwards. Welcome to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast created to encourage and support parents of special needs children. I'm Tonya Wallum, and I'm glad you're here. So Fred, your introduction for me was interesting enough, just with your nickname and everything else. But I want to get into that in a little bit. Starting out, so you had a stroke when you were young.
Mm-hmm.
When was that
Correct.
first discovered?
In my mid-30s.
And what was happening in your 30s that they found out about the stroke?
My sister became friends with a woman whose husband was had a private psychology clinic where he specialized in brain trauma. And my sister's friend said, I think Fred might have a problem and he should get tested. And I got tested and the doctor told me, you have like a severe right hemisphere dysfunction. The right side of your brain is, pretty much obliterated. And that's pretty hard to wrap your head around. And so that's where it all started. But it started to explain a lot of the things that I found difficult in life. And, thankfully they offered some level of therapies and treatments that helped me immeasurably. But again, it was the early 90s. So it doesn't come close to, the types of therapies and treatments that are available today.
Did they say why it wasn't recognized when you were a child?
Well, I think just because I'm, 390 years old, they weren't looking for things like that as a kid. It just wasn't that time. It was the early 60s.
Right.
And, I think infant strokes, I'm told, are more common than people realize.
Really?
But, kids are just so neuroplastic that as they grow, their brain, adapts and builds new pathways and things like that without them even knowing. But
right.
I think it's a difficult thing for parents. When my parents found out, they were devastated.
Oh,
because I had been put in the camp of, if Fred would stop being such a smart ass and apply himself, he'd do really well. My parents had no reason to question that. And they had a lot of their own stuff going on. So it just, I guess I found out when I was supposed to find out.
Right. So you said it was your sister who recommended that you go?
My sister's friend.
Your sister's friend. So do you have more than one sibling, or was it just the two of you?
Yes, I have a brother.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to think, how large the family was too, because I think that makes it
Hmm.
harder to pick up on some things sometimes.
Hmm.
Especially, I'm like you. I was born in the early '60s, so and so things were different than they are today,
Hmm.
and the types of infant checks that were happening weren't the same as what they have today.
Hmm.
So so when you're 30, they're talking about how your brain is, and I'm thinking, all right, so how would I react to that situation? I think I would be like you were, but also at some point it's got to click too that, well, I'm still the same person that I was before they told me this, so it's still there. It's just that you didn't know that part was there. But
Hmm.
did you have, like, when other than being a smart aleck, were you did you have any like challenges in school? Were there any,
Oh,
like, looking back on
yeah.
it? So nothing showing up with that.
Yeah, there was a ton of stuff, but it was all just lumped in the same bucket. Fred's just not applying himself.
So
So,
you weren't trying,
for
you weren't
example,
interested.
yeah. So,
Interesting.
what I know now that was explained to me probably 6 or 8 years ago with a neurologist, um, I have a condition called hemiparesis. So the body is split in half vertically, and my left side of my body is slightly paralyzed
Okay.
all the way up and down because the right hemisphere is shot. So I'm legally blind in my left eye,
Okay.
but yet for my entire childhood, the doctors just thought I had a lazy eye.
Oh,
So they kept patching me and trying to bring it up, but it wasn't the eye that was the problem. It was that the brain couldn't process anything.
right. So they were
So
aware of
tons of stuff
the,
like that.
yeah, so they were aware of things that were there, but just didn't have a name for the cause of it,
They didn't know
or
it
at
was
least,
an issue because um, in my book, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I talk about cognitive bias. Like the doctors, once they decide on something, quite often they're not moving off their spot. So if they don't have a reason to look for something else, they're just going to say you've got an unresponsive lazy eye. It's not common, but it happens. Tough
right.
luck.
We've had similar conversations with some of my other guests that have come on where, well, like even my own family's case, where you run into a doctor who may mean well, but they don't necessarily look beyond what they think they're seeing in front of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do hear this a lot in the types of conversations that I'm having with people who have had disabilities or special needs. It takes someone to continue asking questions and to keep researching to um, to try and find those answers. And I think
Mm-hmm.
this is a valuable conversation because even today, I think it could happen the same as it did with you if it's not something obvious that's jumping out at a doctor. And so, not saying that parents, if you have a child with a lazy eye, that's not what it is. Maybe that is what it is. but
Mm-hmm.
but as we're always saying on this, you want to be asking questions. You want to be making sure that you're doing some research and that you're advocating for your child.
Mm-hmm.
So Fred, with elementary, and also you started school on time. You walked before that. You talked when you
Mm-hmm.
typically would have been talking and everything.
Oh, did I talk? Yeah.
I'm assuming you're not the oldest child, or are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No.
The oldest isn't always the talker with an attitude. No, the oldest is
Mm-hmm.
normally the one who's more nurturing. Of course, I'm thinking half
Mm-hmm.
of our audience is going to call in and say, "No, I actually am the older one with an attitude." But
Mm-hmm.
so I'm thinking that you probably have done a little bit of research now on understanding what the stroke was. Do you feel that you're equipped to be able to talk about today's level of what would be happening if a child were to have a stroke?
I think so. I think, parents are looking for markers so much more than they
Yes.
were when I was a kid. And the doctors and nurses are also more aware in the birthing room
Yes.
of things that might not be going right or wrong. So I think there's a huge advantage. This will sound funny, to having a stroke now versus having a stroke in the
Well, true, true.
1960s. So,
So, do you know what some of the signs or red flags might have been? Like if a parent today is looking at their child, like what it would look like if a child to know whether they had had a stroke or not.
well, I think like most medical things, you have to look for trends and groupings. So if it was only that my lazy eye was lazy, that would be one thing. But if you're seeing that your kid can't learn colors, because I can't do colors. So when you see different things adding up, that's when you need to take a deeper dive, I think. Um, Even when we were learning to write, I know kids don't learn to write anymore, so that might not be such a great example. But my handwriting is atrocious. I could not write between the lines. And the teachers were just like screaming at me for, wasting paper and not trying and all these other things. Um, so I had a comparative test done by this doctor, um, and they do a finger click test. So they know, they've been doing these for dozens and dozens of years. So they know approximately what a normal dominant hand should be able to do. So I'm currently right dominant hand. My dominant hand was performing at what a non-dominant hand should perform at. So I'm going to guesstimate the number because I don't remember exactly, but it's probably a good 30% less. So say you were supposed to be able to click 100 times. I was only able to click 70. Then they went to my left hand, and oh my gosh, it was like even way lower than that. So it
So, do you
was
think
pretty
you were
obvious.
probably a left-handed?
It's possible. My left-handedness does run on my mom's side of the family, and I can put on a baseball glove and catch with either hand.
Okay, but throwing the ball,
Well, throwing the ball, because I've got the paralysis, that's never going to be good. So,
right, right. The yeah, and wasn't thinking about that side of it because
mhm,
I can play golf right-handed if I'm driving, but if
mhm,
I'm putting, I putt left-handed, and I don't know if it's visual or if it's coordination. I'm not sure which one it is, but it's just always been natural to putt left-handed, and
mhm,
I can turn it the other way around, but I'm not as accurate with it. It just feels
mhm,
feels funny, but I hit a baseball right-handed. I've never tried it
mhm.
left-handed. I don't know. Maybe it would feel more comfortable if I tried it left-handed. but
I
but
I bat right-handed. I golf right-handed. I played hockey left-handed.
so yeah. So there. Yeah, I think there are a lot of things like that it can pass over right and left sides. Um, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So your right hemisphere is where the damage was done from the stroke, which
Mhm.
affects the left side of your body, correct?
Yes, for the most part, yeah.
And tell me more about the paralysis that you're talking about. So, are you able to use your? I mean, you're using your left hand while we're talking here.
Hmm.
So, like, what exactly? Like, how much does that affect you, or did it affect you when you were younger, even?
Oh, it affected me a lot. It affects your balance. Uh,
Okay,
it affects my depth perception. It affects my visual memory. Um, all sorts of things. Um,
right.
I had an auditory issue. I could hear the words. I could understand the words, but I couldn't understand them in a sentence.
Oh,
Uh, I couldn't track lines while I was reading.
okay.
So I'd reread the same sentence over and over and over again.
So how did you do in school then? Like did you have tutors that were working with you? What did you do to get through school?
No, I had, my moments of Stephen Hawking brilliance. And then other days I was just me. So, it turns out I am pretty smart. I just didn't know how to learn.
Okay.
And we didn't know that I needed accommodation.
Right.
So, after working with this doctor, I call them the brain trainers. I worked with them for a number of years, and I was able to go to university. I got a bachelor's degree, and then I went to graduate school and did an MBA. So I did make a lot of progress, um, but it's still nowhere near normal. So
So did you do you did
if
all of that after you were diagnosed?
yes,
Okay. So you were in your 30s at the time.
yes.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a paralysis scale. I've never talked about this with the neurologist or my other doctors. So if there was one from, 100% being you're totally paralyzed, I'd say I'm 25% on my left side.
Okay.
It's that much of a difference between the two sides of my body.
And has that improved since you did the therapy?
No, no, not at all.
So that because I'm wondering too, had they known, I mean, we can't go back to the 60s and fix what was happening
Mm-hmm.
at that time, but had they known, would getting the therapy right away have helped recover some of the loss that you had in abilities like motor skills and everything?
Oh, I think most likely, again, because kids are more neuroplastic
Right.
than we are at adults. I mean, you really have to grind to achieve neuroplasticity as an adult. And, I'm still trying to do new things. Every so often, I'll try and draw, um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so I'll go on YouTube and, how do you draw a face for 6-year-olds and things of that nature? Because my dominant hand isn't really good,
Right. Right.
you
Well,
know.
I'm trying to think if I were
So,
trying to do it with my left hand, it would take more coordination for drawing to do things.
mhm,
And if I were, well, I used to write with my left hand all the time, but out of practice
mhm,
now, it would be more awkward with it.
mhm. I'd like to think that today there are better modalities for working not only with child stroke victims but with adult stroke victims. There's a lot more recovery. They just know how to treat you better now.
Well, yeah, I think yeah, time has given more experience. More research has been put into brain health, even with that. So I think that is part of it there. So parents who have a young child who either had a stroke at birth or before birth, even during that process, or they're little bit older but still in those early years, what type of support do you think that they should have involved with them, either as parents or just as therapists for their children? You were talking about the doctor that you had worked with. Was that a psychologist or a neurologist?
He was a psychologist who had done some specialized training in neurotherapy. Um, I think today you'd start off with the doctor, getting you hooked up with an occupational therapist
Okay.
and a physiotherapist, and depending on the person, like different modalities will work differently for each person. So even if you and I had the same brain injury, they're like fingerprints. Mine is mine and yours is yours, and
Yeah.
the therapy that works for me may not work for you. So you might have to try a few different modalities to help your child along. Um, but they're out there, and hopefully you're covered by various insurances and whatever to help you along, because it can be pretty expensive.
Right. Right. When you're in Canada and we're in the U.S., and I know it's kind of a battle, no matter where you are, as far as getting coverage for some of the therapies that you have. The So I did want to ask you. So in the intro, I talked about you having a traumatic summer. I believe it was the summer of 2009. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Do you think that the stroke that you had at infancy led to the events that happened that summer?
That's a great question. And I've asked my various cardiac experts, and they don't see a correlation. They know what the condition is that caused me to have that horrific summer. And it's something you don't usually see until men in their 70s.
Wow.
But it hit me in my 40s and just hammered me. And they don't know why this happened to me. But, these are things people can make a guesstimate. They can say maybe your vagus nerve was damaged or, something like that. But there's no real way of knowing. But it's a good theory.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You wonder because the brain controls everything. So, how was that on there? Well, speaking of that summer, you have a
Mm-hmm.
book that's out that talks about that. In fact, the
Mm-hmm.
name of it, I believe, is "The Summer I Died 20 Times." Is that correct? Do I have the right name?
Yes.
So, "The
Yes.
Summer I Died 20 Times." Tell us about the book. Oh, there. See, he is ready for that question.
Mm-hmm.
Those that are listening, we'll put the link in the show notes so that you can access that. But tell us a little bit about it for anyone who may want to go and find that.
So at the time, I was a business professor. I was actually teaching an economics session, and I was home marking papers. And I suddenly woke up at my desk from what I thought was like a deep sleep. And it was a horrific experience. And I didn't know what was happening to me. Um, but the short story is my heart had stopped. And it had stopped for quite a while. So the condition is called sudden onset severe heart block. So usually you get heart block, it goes in stages, and I might have this reversed. So I think third degree is the least problematic. Second is, and one is, you're likely to die. And I went from 3 to 1 really, really quickly. So, and they just, they kept. I'm a overweight, middle-aged white guy, so they could heart attack. You're having a heart attack. You're having a heart attack. But then they would do the blood work, and the enzymes that show you're having a heart attack weren't there. So, but they were determined to prove I was having a heart attack. So it went on for months until we caught it on film on a halter monitor, and then they saw that what was actually happening. And I was in the hospital when that happened, and they I forget exactly how many days. I had a good 3 or 4 more episodes right in the hospital, and the the best thing about all this is almost every time that my heart stopped and my blood pressure would go to zero, you have no oxygen in your brain, and you're clinically dead for 30 seconds or more, I would hit my head on whatever was the hardest thing in the immediate area. So I was just layering it on to that initial brain damage. It was just, you know,
Wow.
before we started recording, you were telling me about the young man working with the toppings,
Yes.
the ice creams. I'm just like loading brain damage toppings. So
Well, so your heart is stopping, your head is becoming I'm assuming concussed at that point if you're hitting your head really
mhm,
hard. Um,
mhm.
and then you're already dealing with things that you are trying to reverse through therapies and everything to get everything working in the right direction. Wow. Well, so this is your story of that journey through that summer, correct?
It starts in that summer, um, and it's a tiny bit of a spoiler, so you guys can fast forward if you don't want a spoiler. So the fix for my condition is a pacemaker, and they finally implanted a pacemaker in me, and the pacemakers are great. while they're working.
Oh, no.
I'm 100% dependent on a pacemaker to replace the electrical signals that aren't working in my heart anymore. And in 2013, the pacemaker decided to fail.
That wasn't very
So,
long.
no. So we've got suspicions of what might have caused that. So, we can go all Area 51 on this and stuff like that. But the doctors, again, didn't understand why I kept clinically dying, because that's not something that they would look for. And finally, they figured it out, and I had a couple of surgeries that didn't go very well. And in 2018, it happened again.
Wow.
So, the odds of all these things collectively happening to
Of
me.
any of these things happening, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's just like in the billions and billions.
Wow.
So,
And you're still with us to tell us about it, which I appreciate, because
mm-hmm.
that has been an interesting road. I'd say a rough road too. I'm sure during the because any surgery is tough, but you've had more than just surgery going on with all of this. Well, you not only have the book out, but you also have a podcast. So tell us about the podcast too, because this is a podcast audience, so they may want to come and listen to what you're doing over there.
So going with the Summer I Died 20 Times theme and the Repeatedly Dead Fred name, I have the Dead Man Walking podcast. So there's that dead theme. And I have 4 foundational issues that I talk about in the podcast. So the first is people who have overcome adversity. And there's some pretty wild stories out there that, I'm grateful I get to share. And when people hear these, they know they're not alone, but there is a lot of positive outcomes despite what you're going through. I had a lot of people help me get my book published. So I like to talk to other emerging authors and people in the publishing business to, hopefully give them a boost. As I mentioned, I was a business professor. So I love talking small business and financial literacy. And fourthly, the thing that has probably saved my life the most and helped me recover the most is intermittent fasting. So, I talked a lot about health and mental health and intermittent fasting. I probably talk too much about intermittent fasting, my friends would tell me, but it's truly the health benefits of intermittent fasting are just off the charts.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of different things going on with the podcast, but I'm hearing through all of it, I think a lot of my audience may be interested in that. So those who are listening or watching on YouTube, go over and check it out. We will put the links to how to find the podcast. Are you on audio and on video?
I'm not sure. I'm on YouTube. I'm also on Spotify and Apple and Amazon that I know of.
Well, this is really good. Do you have any other projects working on right now?
Well, I'm working on a follow-up book. Because
give us a little teaser there.
There's a few more heart surgeries. I've had a couple of pacemaker surgeries that I think I'm the only person in the world who's had these.
Wow.
So my surgeon is a wizard. He's like Harry Potter level wizard. And, my last surgery, which was last November, it was supposed to be 25, 30 minutes and it ended up taking 3 hours. And, so there's just, complications that never happened to other people happened to me. And, my surgeon's on the phone with, his surgical mentor, and they're talking and saying, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we, it was just amazing. And there's a nurse at a monitoring station for the pacemaker, and she's calling the pacemaker company to say,
wow.
What happens if we do this and we do that? And, does it void the warranty? I'm joking about that part, but I mean, there were a lot of people working really hard to make that last surgery very successful.
Definitely have a lot to say and a lot of stories to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, because
And
I'm glad you're still here among us.
me too. Um, people ask if, you know, well, I don't want to get into the religious part, but, somebody wanted you alive is, a version of so, what do they want you alive for?
Right. Right.
You can only make your best guess, but seeing as though I've been given so many opportunities, I think I have an obligation to try and help other people go through whatever they're going through. And that's what I hope to achieve, with the book and the podcasts. And if I get some speaking gigs, hint, hint to the audience, love to talk to you in person.
So he is available if you, we will have, actually speaking of that, how's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
They can go to my Instagram, which is repeatedly DF. I didn't want to make it too long, so repeatedly Dead Fred. They can find me there, or they can find me with my email, repeatedly.dead.fred@gmail. And those are the two easiest. Or LinkedIn, Fred Rutman on LinkedIn.
Well, Fred, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you sharing your story. And listeners, we're gonna talk a little bit more about childhood strokes in the coming weeks. But I wanted Fred to come in and tell us about his because this was such an unusual situation, and I don't like that you've had to have all these things happen to you, but I appreciate the story behind them.
Initial meeting.
I know. My initial response was all good, but. But that's a whole other story.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for sharing it with my audience and letting us get to know you a little bit. And those that are listening, be sure to check out his book and his podcast as well.
Thank you, Tanya. Much appreciated.
As we conclude this episode, Fred Rutman's incredible journey reminds us that the human spirit can triumph over even the most daunting challenges. I hope this story has inspired you as much as it has me. If you'd like to show your support for the podcast and help bring more amazing stories like Fred's to the world, consider making a donation at buymeacoffee.com/waterprairie. Your contribution goes a long way in making a difference. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, every obstacle can be an opportunity for growth. I'll see you next week.